And then the sound seems to be all around him, as if in all dimensions, this sound of this maniacal laughter is pressing in on him. Like I mentioned before, one of my all-time favorite folk tales have to do with ghost passengers. The idea you're driving down a highway late at night, you see a person by the side of the road who looks like maybe they need some help. You let them into their car, and somewhere along the lines, you realize this is not a living person. These folktales are also great because they're one of the few widely circulated folktales that have actually been reported on in the media. We're looking at another such folktale here. In Massachusetts, there is a road that is called Route 44, and Route 44 stretches through some pretty rural parts of Massachusetts. That was a motorcycle that drove by. In Massachusetts, there is a road called Route 44. Motorcycle again. Should I wait for it to leave? I live on a pretty busy road. It's kind of a common occurrence, even at 10 o'clock at night. I'll give it a second. There it is again, taking off. Good night, sir. What was I saying? He's still there. Still there. There he goes. Okay. I don't know if that showed up or not. In Massachusetts, there is a road that is called Route 44. And Route 44 goes through some pretty rural parts of Massachusetts as well as some small towns throughout Massachusetts. 40 years ago, a young couple was driving their car down Route 44 in Massachusetts late at night, and they had an experience that they still can't explain to this day. This young couple was driving down the road very late at night. They had been at an event earlier in the evening, and now they had to drive back to the town in which they lived, which unfortunately was going to get them back very late. Now, this stretch of Route 44 was pretty remote. You had about a half an hour stretch of road to get from one town to the next, and then about another half an hour to get from that town to the town after that. And along this route is really just farmland and woods, and that's about it. You see some scattered houses, but at this time of night, especially back then, you would have been lucky to even see another car. So the couple is driving along. They're starting to get pretty tired. They want to get home. And all of a sudden, the car starts making some noises that don't sound too good. The car breaks down and the husband has to pull over onto the shoulder. It's important to keep in mind that this was back in the early 1980s. People did not have cell phones at this time. So if your car broke down, it was bad. You had to hope that there was another car that would come by. You could flag them down. You could explain to them, hey, I'm broken down here. Whenever you get to where you're going, do you think you could call a tow truck to come get us? Now, if you're broken down on a rural stretch of road in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, and you haven't seen another car for 40 minutes, you recognize that this is pretty bad. You're looking at your road map and you're saying, okay, it's 15 miles to the next town. We could walk there, but it's probably going to take us until afternoon tomorrow to get there. We could spend the night in the car, which is less than ideal, or we can just hope and pray that another car comes along. The husband was by no means a mechanic, but he knew a little bit about cars. So after they had safely gotten over to the side of the road, he turned the car off. He said, I'm going to go take a look at the engine. Maybe there's something I could do just as a temporary fix to get us to the next town where maybe we can get a motel and then take it to a mechanic in the morning. So the husband gets out of the car. It's pitch black all around him aside from the headlights of the car. He's walking over to the front of the car. He's about to lift up the hood when he happens to just take a look down the road in the direction that the headlights are shining. and he sees what looks like a man, although he's not exactly certain. So he's kind of squinting, the headlights are helping a little bit, but the man is still kind of shrouded in darkness. And he's thinking to himself, well, we're near all these farms. Maybe this is a farmer. Maybe I can ask him if he could call a tow truck for us. So the husband starts walking toward this figure that he assumes to be a man sitting on a log by the side of the road, which granted is a little bit weird to do in the middle of the night, but they're starting to feel a little bit desperate. And he's walking very cautiously because this is still a stranger that's doing kind of a strange thing by sitting next to the side of a highway in the middle of the night. And he's looking at this man, and the closer he gets, the less concerned he is. The closer he's getting, the more normal this man is starting to appear. He had very bright red hair, full head of red hair. He was wearing a red flannel button-up shirt. He was wearing blue jeans and work boots. So he looked like a farmer. So he's thinking, okay, maybe, just maybe, this is a farmer that owns that farmhouse I see over in the distance. Keep my fingers crossed. But he also doesn't want to get too close. So by the time he's about 15, 20 feet away, he says, excuse me, our car broke down. I was wondering if there was a phone nearby that I could use. And the man who's sitting on the log is just staring straight ahead into the field across the road. And so the husband is thinking, okay, maybe he is hard of hearing, maybe he didn't hear me. Excuse me, do you know if there's a phone nearby that we could use? As you can see, we just broke down back here and we're trying to get to the next town. Still nothing. So the husband starts walking a little bit closer to the man. He's getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer. He's about 7-8 feet away now. He's kind of squinting at him because he's starting to realize that there's something off here, but he can't quite put his finger on it yet. And he says one final time, excuse me, sir, is there a phone nearby that we could use? And slowly the man lifts up his head and starts to stare at the husband. And as he does, he forms a creepy grin. And the grin just gets bigger and bigger and wider and bigger until this grin is growing to abnormal proportions. It almost looks like the grin of a clown mask. It's becoming so wide. And the husband is starting to back off because he's saying something is clearly wrong here. And he's looking directly at this man when the man's eyes roll over and become completely white. And so now he has these white eyes, this wide, massive, creepy clown grin. The husband is just about to scream out when the man tilts his head all the way back, looks up at the sky, and starts laughing like an absolute maniac. It wasn't a laugh like something is funny. It was a laugh of somebody who has absolutely lost their mind. And now the husband is in panic mode. Instead of backing off slowly, he starts sprinting back to the car as fast as he can go. But as he's sprinting, he realizes that the laughter is no longer coming from behind him. It starts changing directions. It starts coming from his right side, then his left side. It starts coming from the direction that the car is in. And then the sound seems to be all around him, as if in all dimensions, this sound of this maniacal laughter is pressing in on him. He finally makes it back to the car. He opens up the car door. He hops inside. He slams the door. He hits the lock. And then he looks over at his wife. And his wife has tears running down her face, and she's crying almost inconsolably. And he says to her, "You saw it too, didn't you? You saw what I just saw, and you heard what I just heard, didn't you?" She says, "I don't know what you saw, but you got out of the car. Remember, we had the radio playing, and only a couple seconds after you got out of the car, the radio started to change. The sounds coming out of the radio started to distort, and the music started to sound almost like demonic cackling. And then I heard the DJ on the radio station say my name, specifically my name, my first and last name, and started to say all of these terrible, evil, awful things about me." And the husband is shocked by what he's hearing. He experienced something totally different, but just as terrifying. And then the wife says, and then I heard this horrible laughter, and it sounded like it was coming from the back seat of the car. And I looked back, and I thought somebody was going to be there. I thought there was going to be a maniac in our car, and he was going to hurt me. So I jumped out of the car, and then I realized that the laughter wasn't coming from the car. The laughter was coming from every direction all at once. I heard it from the front, from the back, from the left, from the right, all of this crazy maniacal laughter. And that's when I saw you starting to run toward the car, and I thought you were coming to save me. And so I hopped back in the car too. And the husband's shocked. He can't believe what he's hearing. He had this experience with this crazy thing, and he heard this laughter. She had a totally different experience at the exact same time, but heard the exact same thing. And now they're really starting to panic. They're saying, my God, what are we going to do? We're stuck out here by the side of the road. And they're just praying that somebody will come along and rescue them from this. And just as they're thinking that, they see headlights coming down the road. The husband does not waste any time. He leaps out of the car and starts waving his arms like a maniac to get the attention of this driver. He's standing right out in the middle of the road because he wants to make sure that there is zero chance that this driver doesn't see him. And thank God the driver stops. Now, the husband doesn't tell this driver about all the crazy things that he just experienced because he knew that the driver would think he was a crazy person. But he just says, we're having a real emergency right now. We really, really need to get out of here. Would you be able to drive us into the next town? And the driver says, okay, which way are you going? I don't even know. And he just says, whichever way you're going, the next town, just drop us off there. If there's a motel there, just drop us off there. And we're going to come back for our car in the morning. And so fortunately, the driver was a very nice older couple, and they allow them to get in their car and they take them to the next town. The next morning, they come back, they get their car, everything seems normal. The husband kind of thought that maybe this was some kind of ploy to get them out of the car so they could steal valuables in the car. This was some sort of elaborate criminal scheme, but nothing was taken from the car. What this couple didn't know was that similar stories had been reported on this stretch of Route 44 for years. People would see a man by the side of the road sitting on a log. He would have thick red hair. He would have a red plaid shirt. They would get out to see if this man needed help. And once they did, things would go crazy. They would hear terrible maniac laughter. They would hear all sorts of awful things and threats being said to them. Things would move through the air, just absolutely tormenting these poor people that would get out of their cars. Eventually, this story wound up in the local media because so many people had been experiencing this that they started writing into the local news to say, hey, something weird is happening on Route 44. You should really look into it. And so the local media actually did quite a bit of research into Route 44. Particularly, they wanted to see if anybody had ever been killed on that stretch of Route 44 who matched the description of this man. He looked to be in his late 30s, early 40s, strong build, red hair, essentially the appearance of a farmer, but they couldn't find anything. But after looking unsuccessfully, they started to put out calls to the public to say, hey, if anybody knows anything about this, no matter how insignificant you think it might be, could you please write to us or feel free to come into the station and sit down with us and tell us? And one day somebody did come into the media outlet, and it was an older retired police officer who was in his mid-60s. And he said to them, now I don't know if you're going to find it in the records, but I do know somebody who matches that description, who was killed on that very stretch of road. The officer gave them a name and said that he was a farmer. And one night he had been out somewhere and he had been drinking. And he tried to find his way home, but he was confused and he was inebriated and he wound up in the middle of the road a car came along that was going too fast and hit him and killed him. Now, unfortunately, the media was never able to confirm this. They had the name of this man, but they were never able to confirm that this is the man that died on that stretch of road. In fact, they were never really able to find any record at all of this man. So it's always been debated in that particular community. Was this officer right about who this man was? And does that explain all of these crazy experiences that people have been having on this stretch of Route 44 in Massachusetts? Makes you think.